meeting yet. So I guess, first I want to say hello. My name is Jaime Martinez. I'm the newish, 7 weeks new, I guess, planning director for the Village of Ossining. It's been a very interesting time to start a new job and try to get familiar with all of the new faces and new places. I haven't gotten to experience the village as much as I would have liked, but I have met with quite a few people over my time here. So it's been very, very interesting. Ossining's really a very unique, I think, place in Westchester County. It's kind of got, this beautiful scenic environmental edge to it. It's sort of like this village on a hill overlooking the Hudson River. There's a lot of beauty, and so I'm looking forward to seeing the day when there's a little more activity, environmental, a little more economic activity, and being able to go and visit the stores and stuff like that. But it's a beautiful place. Before I was here, I came from the Yonkers Downtown Waterfront Business Improvement District, and I worked there for 3.5 years. And prior to that, I was the planning commissioner in Mount Vernon for a couple of years. I worked in a different capacity as a planner, doing GIS stuff with Mount Vernon prior to taking over as commissioner. And before that, I was with the county for 3.5 years. So I've been in planning for, I guess, since 2007. I graduated in 2007 from grad school. So a little bit about my background.
Cool.
But I'm glad to be here and very thankful for the opportunity.
Nice. So are you still living down in Yonkers, or are you living in Ossining now?
No, I live in Yonkers. So I can't move just yet. So perhaps one day. But yeah, I still live in Yonkers. So I actually live in my wife's house. She lives, it's not my wife's house, it's my mother-in-law's house, the house that my wife grew up in. So it's kind of like a 2-family home. I've been living here for a while, so.
Very cool. And that stained glass behind you is beautiful.
It's a historic home. It was built in 1909. I live in a historic district in Yonkers. Is anybody here familiar at all with Yonkers?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, there's a historic
I go
district
down
off of
for
Warburton.
work at Hillview Reservoir kind of often now.
Okay. Well, there's a historic district off of Warburton, pretty close to the downtown, and it's like a block full of 100-year-old plus homes. This one is I think the youngest probably, and it's 111 years old. So.
Wow, that's cool.
So nice, cool.
Why don't we get started? Hopefully Erica will join us. And we've got 4 of our 5 tonight. We've got Trustee Levin, we've got our planning director, and Corporation Counsel. Nice to see you all, folks.
Thank you.
We have no continuing business of the board, so we'll go right into new business. The planning, just so you folks know, the planning board did have a meeting last Tuesday, but there was nothing from that meeting which warranted a referral to your board. So, and they are now going to be back on their monthly meetings. So they're back on schedule, doing what they have to do. First thing that looks like on the agenda is Town Village Environmental Ordinance. I'm not, bring me up, is that, are we talking wetlands there? Or are we talking just sort of more general stuff? Because I was not at the last meeting, if anyone remembers.
I assume that that's the wetlands law. Sorry, was somebody going to speak up?
Okay.
No, I think that was it. I think it was the wetlands issue.
Just so you know, at the May 20th legislative meeting during new business, Jaime and I will be presenting to the board on the wetlands legislation. Jaime is doing some work on that now. I'm looking at the local laws. Trustee Levin was kind enough to send me Briarcliff, Town of Ossining. I also have Yorktown, Newcastle, Tarrytown, and Sleepy Hollow. And questions will be in terms of buffer sizes and things like that, and basically how to do it, and what is actually defined as a wetland. Under what circumstances are permits not required? Most of the codes do have provisions where no permit is required. If, for example, you're like mowing your lawn or something like that. Some then have where permits are required but can be issued just by the building inspector. And some have it where it's a higher level project where the permit would require planning board approval. And in those that require planning board approval, the town of Ossining, for example, there is a referral to their EAC, both for permits that are to be determined by the building inspector, as well as permits that are to be determined by the planning board. And the EAC, provides its recommendation with regard to those particular applications that are made. And then it would be up to the building inspector whether to grant, or the planning board whether to grant particular cases. There's always an option, if the building inspector thinks it's a significant enough project, to send it to the planning board anyway, which is done in most of these jurisdictions. The real question is what the buffer is in the town. For a water course, it's 50 feet. For a water body, it's 100 feet. I have to look at all the others to just see where they are. And the town made some, when I say town, I mean town of Ossining did make some changes to theirs in 2015 to sort of broaden what could be considered within the Wetlands Ordinance. And some of the others have changed it. A number of these municipalities have wetlands ordinances since the 1990s, if not even a little earlier. So that's something that, Jaime and I will be going over. We hope to be able to present the board with an idea of where all the different potential water courses and water bodies are within the village, separate and distinct from what the state defines as a wetlands under the Environmental Conservation Law. One of the things we'll go over with the board is the requirement that there be, we'll call it environmental review of the proposed legislation, which is required by a State Environmental Quality Review Act. The Board of Trustees, because it's a legislative change, would be what we call the lead agency. And the way the state, which we call it secret, but what it divides into is what's called a type 1 action, which is really your big actions, but could also include the comprehensive plan is considered a type 1 action. Then you have your type 2 actions, which in January of 19, the state expanded the list to about 49 different types of items, which are smaller items, but not necessarily so. If the state wanted to develop, for example, siting projects for renewable energy, that comes under type 2. The reason that's important is under type 2, if it's deemed to be a type 2 action, there is no environmental review that is undertaken. It's basically, it's done at that point. In between type 1 and type 2, not surprisingly, the state has a category called unlisted actions, and that's everything else. It is more than likely that the wetlands ordinance here will either be a type 1 action or an unlisted action, in which case the planning department would prepare a document that's called environmental assessment form. It will be the long form, which has a variety of categories. It's about a 13-page form, I believe, that gets filled out. That is done because that document will allow the Board of Trustees to make a determination as to the environmental significance of the wetlands ordinance. What is critical is the board has to make a determination of what you sometimes have heard the phrase positive declaration or a negative declaration. Negative declaration means that there is no significant adverse environmental impact anticipated as a result of the action. And if that happens, if that's a determination by the board, then basically the environmental review ceases. If the board were to determine that there was a positive declaration, which means there would be at least one significant adverse environmental impact, then the environmental review process continues down the road to a document that's called environmental impact statement, known as an EIS, and things like that. Just from how they define what is adverse, I think it's very unlikely that the wetlands ordinance would fit within an adverse category and probably would be resulting in a negative declaration. But to get to that point, there are steps that happen. So you'll have the legislation on the one hand, and then you'll have the environmental review. There will be a public hearing on the legislation, and frankly, there probably will be a public hearing that relates to whether, what the results of the environmental review are. Those can be done at the same time. But that's sort of what the process is that's going to get laid out. The important thing to just consider when we look at the town's ordinance, in particular, Town of Ossining, is remember that they obviously did it with solely the unincorporated portion of the town in mind. So they were not looking at the density of the village. They were not looking at any of those issues there. But that's why, I also, one of the other ordinances I have is also Croton, to get an idea of, again, what all the different buffers are. That's something that, we'll lay out, because that's something that obviously has to be decided by the board as to what they think is the best with input from you folks and the public as well. As I said, we expect also to have some more visual information as to where all these different water courses and water bodies are throughout the village. So that way you can see where things are and where they relate to how a buffer would impact upon particular locations. And so that the plan is that presentation will be made on the 20th of May to the board. We will still be doing Zoom meetings at that point. I expect downstate will be doing remote meetings for quite a while, because under the governor's 7-point plan to start reopening, we are, I think, through 3, unlike upstate where many of the places are through 5. So it's probably not going to be the case here for a bit, but we have to wait for some more executive orders on that.
Stuart, can I ask a question?
Please.
Jaime, first of all, do you want us to just raise a hand so we're not interrupting, or should we just, because it's a small group, just jump in? You're the host. How do you want to run the meeting?
I think that I think it's fine probably to jump in. It appears that we do have an Erica here as an attendee. So I'm going to promote Erica,
Hey, Erica.
as a panelist. And
I don't see the picture, yeah.
I'm going to unmute
Hi.
her.
Yep.
Is she there?
She is.
Erica?
I don't see myself. Hold on. There we go.
Oh,
Now?
there you are.
Hello.
There she is.
I've been listening for a
Hi.
while.
It sounds like you're okay. Erica, we all said before you came on that France's loss is Ossining's gain. You'll get there. You'll get there. Don't
Listen.
worry.
I'm even more resolute now.
Yeah.
I'm sure you are.
So I think that for the purpose of this meeting, it can kind of be an open discussion. It may get easier to raise your hands if people start talking all over each other. But as long as that's not happening, I think if you jump in, it's probably not that big of a deal.
Okay.
The one thing is that if there's anything that has to get voted on and go in to be part of the minutes, you have to do a roll call vote. And so that should be managed by either Erica or by Stuart or myself, just to make sure that for the record, that roll call vote is captured appropriately.
Great. Okay.
So
just want
Jamie
protocols.
is not one of our new people. He's the MC.
Yeah, my name is
He's our new
Jaime,
pla-
and I am the planning director.
Hi Jaime. Hi Jaime.
Hey,
Okay, so
planning. He's the new
are
planning
you a new
director.
employee? Are you a new employee of the village?
I'm about 7 weeks old now, but yeah, I'm coming up on 2 months soon enough, But yes, I'm new.
Awesome. Have you already done introductions?
Yes.
I've introduced myself, but nobody else has introduced themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You like me to reintroduce myself?
I'm sorry. We could do that later. I don't want to waste anybody's time, but I'm welcome to the village, and I'm glad that we have a planner on board. That's a great thing.
I'm happy to be here.
And you're going to be at all at the EAC meetings as the planner.
Of course.
Right.
Great.
But I think the question was, is Jamie Kane still going to come to every meeting?
I don't know, but I don't think so. So I'm not sure. In the past, she had mentioned that she didn't always come to the meetings before.
I've never seen Jamie Kane's face.
Oh, you
Yeah.
know what? I see her at one of the other meetings. You're right.
She does planning and zoning. She's the board secretary for planning and zoning.
Yeah,
She's taking
you're
part in the
right.
comp plan,
The other boards.
Yes.
but not the HPC,
You're
not EAC.
She does a lot. She does all our behind the scenes stuff. Let's give her some credit where credit's due, but she is
Oh, yeah.
not coming
Good
to.
job.
Forgot. I've actually seen her in the other meetings, not this one. So we're talking wetlands, and I did ask, to Stuart's point, I did ask that it be put, that we start moving towards legislation and a draft be drawn for May 20th. It's a public meeting, the legislative sessions. It'll be in the beginning part. So if you would like to attend by Zoom,
When is that? I'm sorry, I missed when you said
May
when that-
20th.
May 20th.
We
So-
just went through it. I think Jaime and Stuart Kahan will be presenting about the legislation and about what others are doing. And Jaime, with his planner's hat, will be discussing and educating us all about wetlands. I just wanted to say that this has come from, part of it from this group's request that we move forward, as you are an advisory committee to the board, actually. And so, I took that seriously, and it's something that I want to get done. There is, when I canvassed the board, I received a thumbs up from every board member. That doesn't mean they're all voting for it, because there's nothing to vote on yet until Stuart presents something and something that we agree, but there seems to be support in principle. So I wanted to just share that with the EAC as sort of, my update about wetlands, since we're discussing it. So Stuart is already update us really well. What I wanted to ask on this group from Stuart, and that's why I interrupted a little bit, Stuart. I apologize, but I just wanted, as you were going through the process, do you have a sense of time frames, like when the planning board gets their piece of it? Is it a 30-day, does a clock start running? Some of these things, there's always a clock that we talk about. Are there any clocks here that we should be aware of?
Well, there are clocks with regard to the environmental part of the review, in terms of, how quickly they have the determination of significance has to be made. That's based upon state regulations, and it's really not a long period of time. 20 days on one occasion, things like that. In terms of, I can tell you this, under the town of Ossinings's ordinance or local law, when an application for a wetlands permit is received, if it is the type of permit to be approved by the building inspector, their EAC has a 10-day turnaround time to—
For the town,
for the town of Ossining, correct. There's a 10-day turnaround time to apprise the building inspector of their recommendation with regard to that permit. If it is an application in the town of Ossining that is to be determined by the planning board, it is a 30-day turnaround time for the EAC.
Can you explain why that would be?
Most likely because the permit granted by the building inspector is for far smaller projects. And so the planning board, which is a board of 5 as compared to a single building inspector, would be in a position that they would have to have, they'd also have to have their meeting to basically do that. The building inspector is a full-time employee of the town, so he would be able to, come back to that. But that's one of the things, and that's in the town's ordinance. I can't tell you what the timeframes are with regard to some of the other local municipalities. I would look that up, but that's sort of what the turnaround is. There is in both of those what we call, for want of a better term, a default approval, which is that if the EAC does not act within the particular time, basically the board, the planning board, the building inspector can essentially, treat it as, a no objection. So it's important to try to, if those timeframes are put in there to get the response back to either the inspector, if that's the way that this ordinance is going to be drafted, to the inspector on the one hand, or the planning board on the other hand. So that's really where the time frame comes in terms of dealing with the permits once the legislation is in place.
Okay.
I actually do have some questions because I know that the town of Ossining ordinance has been put forward and the Briarcliff Manor ordinance has been put forward. I'm curious if the board might be able to just give me some guidance on what it is about the Ossining, the town ordinance that you like. If that's the sort of ordinance that you think is most applicable to the village of Ossining, if there are elements of it that you think are too far reaching, or if there are elements of it that you think are not far reaching enough. And maybe if you're able to speak a little bit on the buffer widths, and whether there are certain types of carve-outs and instances where you may feel like the way that the buffer as written may not be correct for every situation. I know I can think of a couple of unique situations, like along the Sing Sing Kill, where there are some engineered waterways that are of particular interest, where those waterway buffers would extend well into developed houses, but they are engineered to have sort of sheer concrete walls to capture the water within a defined channel. And so having a 50-foot buffer next to sort of an engineered waterway is different than having a 50-foot buffer in a flat sort of area where a stream is running through the center of something. And so if you could give me a little bit of the background on that, it'd be super helpful as I'm going through the analysis.
Well, I think, let me gather my thoughts here. I think that the artificial stream isn't really, I don't think that's what we were quite envisioning as a wetland, more of like a waterway. I don't know would be applicable in this situation. I think what we're trying to look at is actual like wetlands, whether it's been created due to urban development or it was already there. And I think Eric or Tom can more applicably define what an actual wetland is.
Yeah, the town of Ossining defines wetlands in a few different ways. So there's like the National Wetland Inventory. There is DEC defined wetlands, and then there are hydric soils. Westchester County provides base map files for all of those. The hydric soils seems to fall on the definition of anything that is above 25% hydric at any given moment. So it's essentially soils that are either predominantly wet or are a little less than always wet. So they may be seasonal hydric areas where they have kind of wetland in the summer, but it's not necessarily wetland in the winter. But there's a pretty kind of well-defined system for doing that, using the USGS soil survey, hydric soil data that's out there, the NWI data that's out there, and then the DEC data that's out there. But the town of Ossining also refers to water courses, which are essentially like streams and things of that nature. Wetlands have a 100-foot buffer. The streams, or things like the Sing Sing Kill, would have a 50-foot buffer. So they have a smaller buffer than a wetland, but they still do have a buffer that's written into their ordinance. So that's actually, that's a key point. If what you're interested in here in an ordinance is more about preserving wetlands and is less concerned about sort of the buffer around waterways, that would have an impact on how much regulated area there is as we put this together.
I mean, you bring up a really important point, and that's something that the town didn't really need to consider when they were developing their wetlands law, was that we do have a lot of engineered waterways, and I would hate to write off all waterways because we have so many engineered waterways. If we could sort of subdivide those two categories and say, for engineered waterways, the damage has been done. We certainly don't want to make it worse, but the damage has been done. But for, natural, undisturbed waterways, I don't know if there's some way to subdivide those two categories. If other sort of river towns with similar situations have, laws about that. I don't know. I really don't know.
I mean, I'm sure there is a way to sort of maneuver it. In a sense, like I remember, I only got a couple of days to walk around, but I did spend the better part of one day walking from, Market Square, and then I took that walkway across the double arch bridge, and I kind of walked all the way to Crawbucky and back. And one of the things I noticed when I was crossing that bridge, which I forget the name of it right now, I apologize, but I noticed there were houses that were pretty close to a retaining wall, and then a retaining wall went straight down, and then there you have the Sing Sing Kill, and you have the walkway back there. And so it's not all engineered, but some of it is. And so you could certainly probably work with writing the code in such a way that it takes into consideration that if you have a house that's at the top of a hill and it's not in the waterway, really, it's not in the sort of the kind of the banks is I think what you're concerned with that 50-foot buffer. You could say they can put something in their backyard as long as it meets all the other criteria for setbacks and everything else without having to get it reviewed or requiring any special permits, because it's not actually in there. So you could certainly look at the code. I mean, I defer to Stuart to talk about that, but you could change the code. We can look at how other municipalities have dealt with that kind of issue.
And I think our buffer zones are going to have to be a lot smaller because, this is a much more dense area. I mean, it's unreasonable to have 100-foot, as much as we like it, it's 100-foot buffer zone on either side of within the village. And I think even a 50-foot buffer for like a waterway would be too much. It's not going to be feasible in the village. I mean, everybody's going to have to go special.
One of the things,
I think the question, though, might be based on some episodes that have occurred, is that, and I'm only wondering out loud, and I've been doing a lot of reading in the last couple of weeks. I've gone some environmental groups to send me information. So it's really been very educational. It's a super interesting topic. But what occurred to me is that one of the issues is where communities border each other, where Briarcliff meets Ossining, where Ossining Village meets unincorporated Ossining Town. I'm wondering if there's a way, because this is where some situations occur. Not always in the most densely part of our community, but on the border where municipalities, and not just ours, because I read a couple of things about this, some municipalities always choose like their outer corners to do stuff. And it's disturbing to their neighbors who are in a different municipality. So I'm wondering if
We lost you, Rika.
it's possible to have, a 25 or 50 foot in one part, and where there's a border to another community, it might look a little different. I'm just thinking out loud.
I think that's a really great point, Rika, that you should certainly be concerned with how your neighbors feel about stuff like that. Now, I will say that I'm not sure how the noticing has happened here before, but in the village, I assume that if you are within the noticing requirements, whether you live in the village of Ossining or not, really is irrelevant. You do have to notice your neighbors. And so once your neighbors get noticed and the adjacent municipality gets noticed, then that is the opportunity for the other municipality to weigh in and say, look, we have an ordinance that refers to that, and they can provide those comments, which can then go into, the decision that's made about how stuff is treated as it affects their border. So,
Yeah, but
you are required
without regulation, it's just commentary. That's all it is. If you're bordering a community that has 100 feet, on things that happen on the border may require a similar to your neighbor kind of rule versus in other parts. I don't know if that's even possible, if you can delineate. It came to my mind, A, because the situation occurred recently that brought this to my mind, and B, because it was just said, I wonder if we can subdivide into sort of 2 buckets. I never thought of that, and that just popped into my head. Something for Stuart to maybe look at. I don't know if others do that. But, this whole thing, the town, the village of Briarcliff, we live in an area that was developed in the 1800s, bringing to it its own challenges of where borders are. So I'm just putting it out there for food for thought, Hyman, and also for Stuart as another option.
I have a couple of thoughts. Getting back to Jaime's original questions, you raised a couple of good points, and I think that I looked at the intent of putting the wetlands regulations into the village as a twofold. There are 2 concerns that we were trying to address. One is the filling in and loss of wetlands. So, any project within a 50-foot buffer, you could look at and see if that's going to happen or not. And that kind of separates the wetlands from the water courses, like you mentioned, whether they're man-made or natural. And then the second would be the contamination of wetlands, which, that would share the same characteristics of a waterway, where you're looking at runoff from a site going into the wetlands. And that's somewhere where we may want the larger buffer, because, water can travel a lot farther from a site than fill could. But those are a couple of thoughts I had on it. And I think using the soil characteristics to define the wetlands is the best way to go. A lot of the state maps and the maps that are out there just aren't really complete. And there's a lot of small wetlands that get lost. And because of the way the village is and the parcels are all chopped up, kind of need a surveyor or someone with an environmental background to go out and collect field data to determine whether the wetlands are there.
Yeah, I mean, the NWI and DEC wetlands are very few. I mean, it's just the big wetlands that get covered under that. So the hydric soils is a lot more expansive, and certainly changes the nature of what this ordinance would look like. Not necessarily, I mean, the ordinance does call for, surveyors to come in and, delineate the actual, wetlands on site and things of that nature. But the hydric soils, depending on what time of the year you go out and do that survey, there may be no wetland there. And then later in the year there will be, and the hydric soils will pick up on that in a way that's less affected by the climate or the time of year. So one of the other things is just about dealing with, the houses that are built. A lot of Ossining is pretty built out, and they have a lot of small lots, in the village, which is different, I think, from Briarcliff Manor in the town of Ossining, that has much more undeveloped land, and also has probably an average lot size that's much bigger. How do you think that this ordinance should affect existing property owners who are looking to put up decks, things of that nature, not necessarily new buildings, sort of leaving out like vacant lots that are going to be done as infill, but existing homes that are looking to make improvements to their property? How do you feel like that should be addressed?
I think impervious surface would be our first cut. Are they adding impervious surface? Yes or no? That's certainly, if they're adding impervious surface, we would want to have a look at it. If they're expanding their driveway or parking area, you know, that would be something that would be interesting in terms of, you know, hydrological effects.
Patio,
Um,
patio, a stone patio or concrete patio?
I don't know if those are technically considered impervious. It
Okay.
depends on what the material is that they've used.
Yeah, I
So
mean, there's
as we-
porous pavers that take in stuff versus like a straight pour of like a pressed concrete.
Right.
That looks like stone, but really functions like a sheet of concrete
Yeah.
and creates more runoff. So, I mean, so what I'm hearing is that maybe there are opportunities for individuals to propose certain types of materials that wouldn't subject them to the EAC review.
Or
To guide people down a
alternatively-
path of making good decisions also.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think alternatively, instead of them coming to us and saying, well, you know, they don't have I mean, poor person, they don't have any experience. They, you know, they'll come up with a product and we might say, oh, that product is total junk. And, you know, instead of putting the cart before the horse, maybe we should have a list of products that, you know, we are more likely to accept, right? I don't know how you feel
I
about
mean,
that.
I think that's having design guidelines are something that, you know, you see in a lot of municipalities. You see it in form-based code, you know, having those kind of design guidelines and saying that, look, these are the types of products, you know, something that's approved. And there may be some industrial standards that can be built into that. So if there are some industrial classifications that deal with the permeability of water through any of the surfaces that are being provided, maybe that is a way of baking that into some of the details so that people, you know, you allow people to avoid having to go to an additional board to get, you know, their process off the ground. We actually had something the other day at a ZBA meeting where somebody came in and they wanted to get a variance because they had put down without a permit a pad of asphalt. And there was some complaints, you know, from the people that said, oh, you shouldn't grant this variance. It wasn't really a significant variance and they probably would have gotten the variance granted. But there was a lot of, you know, concerns about getting a new survey and this and that. So they said, you know what, we're just going to rip it out and we'll put in some porous pavers.
Okay.
So I'm not sure where they ended up with all this. I think they've decided that they're just going to pull out the asphalt. They're not going to put in porous pavers. They're not going to do anything. They're just going to return it to grass. But, you know, that's better. I think environmentally that's better. Porous pavers than having, you know, more impervious surface, like an asphalt.
And I just have to say that with technology changing, it's not so difficult to, you know, make a recommendation from however we get there that says, you know, every couple of years, certain things should be, certain guidelines should be updated and posted by the municipality. Because the thing that I think is frustrating is a comment that says, if you had posted this and I would have known, I wouldn't have spent all that time and gotten frustrated. Now, things you did in the 1980s, it's a little late, right? But I think to Erica's point, I mean, having these sort of lists, I'm not sure it's part of legislation necessarily, except that it might be examples of things. I don't know. We sometimes get very, very specific when we write law, like very specific about things. And what's not in there sort of doesn't get applied. So I leave that to Stuart. But I think to answer your question, I mean, I think that's what we're doing. I mean, I always have a question whether it's, you know, what do you do with a house that exists versus a house that just became something else? So one family now becomes a 2-family or 3-family. So yeah, it existed, but it wasn't really a one. It got rezoned, it got whatever. So that's an expansion of a house. And that I think is really what we see a lot of. Therefore they need, you know, the driveway or the bigger deck or, you know, put something on stilts or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a lot easier when you have a vacant property and then you can sort of say, well, this is the envelope that I can build in and I'll make decisions about what I'm going to build now based off of my envelope. That's a little, I think it's easier to come up with a solution that's optimal than it is for situations where you have a house that's 70, 80 years old, 100 years old, and somebody wants to put a porch or deck or something. And then you start saying, well, you're kind of encroaching or, you know, trying to figure out what the right way is to make that work in a way that's not onerous.
Did the group answer your question?
I think so, yeah. That's a good answer. Are there, go ahead.
I actually had a question for Stuart and you. When the legislation is introduced, is it subject to public comment and review?
There is yes, is short answer. There will be a public hearing.
Okay. That was it.
All right. Any other guidance? Things to think about?
I'm still not really sure how we will parse out, like you said, the people who are living on a stretch of. I happen to live right across the street from a stretch of stream that daylights for about 100 feet before it goes back under the ground and disappears into God only knows where. I can't even see it on the DEC maps where it goes. It's a total mystery. So, but the point being that, is there a way that we can have criteria that define what an engineered stream is, so it can be clear to the applicant?
Yes.
Is that worth it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that we can, certainly we can look at all the different kinds of options. And at the end of the day, I mean, if people are able to come to the board for, a permit, or if they have to go for a review, but that permit can be granted, as long as there's a way to build. I think the one thing you don't want to do is create a situation where there's this blanket, like you can't build anything here. And so some of the way that the town ordinance is written is it creates this regulated area, which basically says you can't do anything. It's like, here's this long list of things you cannot do if you're in this regulated area, and here's how we define the regulated area. So finding a way inside the ordinance to figure out how to deal with unique situations that are not, what the code intended. And so I have to talk with Stuart to get into the heart of what this ordinance is going to look like, to figure out how that would work. I don't know what that language is, but yes, I do think that there's a way to write the language in such a way that you'll be able to make exceptions and also clear up any confusion about whether a permit is needed in every instance where you have odd things happening, like your property.
Okay. All right. Now, does anybody want to, the next steps, I think Stuart laid out, and you're hearing it. May 20th is like one key date. The public meeting for something like this, probably, a little while after that. My understanding, this may have changed, is that for a public meeting about this, and Stuart can chime in, is, may not be on Zoom. That's something like that may actually have to wait till doors are open again. Maybe that'll be in June, which isn't so far away. But I think we have the major gist of what we're going, but you all have to help me because you're advisory to the board of trustees, remember. And so I took this a lot from you, also because the board actually was interested in it. So if there's more that you want to say, you don't have to wait for another meeting, because we're doing this on May 20th. Not approving, just the beginning stage starts, on the 20th. So just let me know if there's anything you want to share with me, if you want to present something for a couple of minutes. We don't want to turn this into a whole thing, because I think it's really for the planner and Stuart to really educate the public and as well as the board. So just let me know. That's all I'm saying. I'm not voting on anything right now. Just asking if anybody after this call wants to share information with me, just email me or call me or whatever. And, I would be very excited to alleviate some of the stress that we have seen, both in the boards and the public in the boards, regarding some of these issues that I would like to diminish the stress that's been happening. And I personally, as a political person, am not so crazy about how things are happening on the borders of various communities vis-a-vis the environment. And I think we need to really look at that, with our neighbors in all directions. And one of our neighbors is the Hudson River that gets to be the deposit of all of our errors and all of our, lack of legislation. So, let me know what your thoughts are. I'm happy to take it to the appropriate place.
Speaking of legislation, the native, I'm sorry, I can't remember if this is on the agenda for tonight. The native plants policy that we were working on before all this started, I think Stuart was drafting up some legislation to present to the board. Did that ever, where is that?
I thought we did that already, no?
Did we?
No, it's
Is that a legislation?
it's among the many local laws that are sitting on my desk.
I didn't know that was legislation. I thought that was more like a policy type of scenario.
We talked about integrating some language into the code for buildings above a certain size. Commercial buildings, I think we said units or more. I think we said 3 units or more that we wanted to require.
Yeah, it was something based on the size of buildings, units, height. Like we had a whole parameter set up.
We didn't get too specific about it, but that was the idea that we tossed around, is that anything that was 3 units or more would be a good threshold to require that they have a certain portion of their plants be native species.
Okay. So Stuart, do you know when you might get to that?
Trustee Levin.
That's a ballpark.
No, I can't.
We're doing this one, so now,
Honestly, I can't. I'm already up to local law 8. So
and it's only May.
I'm dancing the best I can.
Okay. All right. So
I was just curious.
I can say this. It has been discussed and has been raised previously with the planning board. And now that we have a planning director on staff, I think there's a greater ability to make sure that the plans that are coming for those 3+ unit projects would include native plantings. So that's a big benefit. It can certainly be put into, in essence, the force of law, if you want to say it. But with a planning director there, and as our meetings, are proceeding now, that certainly something can be done and can be discussed with the applicants at the time they initially are submitting, so that they know that that's what they should do to basically hasten the process.
I think that's an excellent idea, and it's an excellent plan B for now, because I really have a sense, and maybe there's disagreement, when I've looked at the other boards, like some of the people don't really object to it. They just didn't know. Like once they're told, they usually say, oh, okay, give me the list. I'll give it to my guy. I don't think that we've had a lot of pushback. I think the pushback only comes more like, I wish I would have known. I wouldn't have gone as far as I did. It's another one of those. That's why I actually didn't remember that you guys asked for it as legislation. I thought we were doing it more as a recommendation policy, but now that you jogged my memory. But I'm sure, Jaime, that you could help the EAC sort of move that forward with your knowledge.
Yeah.
Because the lists are all available by the county. It's not like we have to recreate the wheel or anything, I don't think.
No, I think a lot of the bigger architects are, already using a lot of native plants. That's sort of the direction that things are going.
No.
We've yet to have one come before us that hasn't had that problem.
Yeah, that's why they want it, because so far that's not actually been the case.
Are these small developers or are these large developments that none of them are using? Really?
Well, it's a mixed bag.
It's mixed. It's a fair statement. Yes.
Part of it is that, whatever's available commercially, you're still waiting, the recent interest in native plants kind of drives the commercial industry. And so I work with a lot of developers in my job, and I see a lot of construction plans, and really it is a mixed bag. Some people will only use, what they've been using since 1985. And then some people, will embrace the newness but they have to know what's out there. And sometimes they just don't know what's out there. And it's rapidly changing because one of the biggest native plant nursery, one of the biggest supplier nurseries we have locally is Hardscrabble Farm in North Salem. Mm-hmm. And they have, every year they have a tremendous new influx of new native species that they didn't have before. And so people just have to know about them. So, a lot of times, Frank Guido from Cotona, he's been using this plant and he doesn't want to try anything new. So, but slowly people will sort of accept it a little bit, but it certainly helps if you have a law that has teeth. Because if it's just a kind suggestion, sometimes I'll just kindly tell you to. Thanks, but no thanks.
Okay, so
I think, Jaime, it's a little more than that, so you understand. The EAC, unlike the planning and zoning, as you know, doesn't have the same teeth. And so sometimes it could be some of those board members say, listen, absent a law, mm-hmm. we can't really make someone do that. We can suggest the way you do, but absent the law, and I think mm-hmm. that's sort of where that's what's happened.
I got you.
That where the law is silent, this is what happens.
All right, and I'm assuming that when anything goes in front of planning board, it has to get, a planting plan before it gets approval. So the planning board is going to be the one that has to make sure that this happens as well.
Yeah, the planning board needs to keep the lines of communication open with us. So that, because, God bless them, they don't necessarily have the expertise to know what's native or not. And, good for them. They have us and we do that. So, we're happy to provide that service, but yeah, we the plan needs to come before us so we could give them that advice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, that historically that wasn't necessarily happening, especially at the early part of the process. Sometimes the developer will submit the plan with the landscaping, pretty late in the game, and they've already paid their landscape architect to draw up this plan, so they don't necessarily want to pay more money to go back and have it revised. So, it's important that we're looped in, not necessarily at 90%. It would be better if we're looped in during the design phase of any new construction. If we're looped in at the 50%, then nobody can complain that, they came in and they told me and I already spent money and I already lost money. If we can come in at 50% design and say, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay, so so just to clear it up, you're requesting that the ordinance require a certain percentage of native plants for anything over 3 units, and also a review of their planting plan be submitted to the EAC as part of the ordinance as well?
I'm happy to do that. Yeah. Yes, I'm happy to look at planting plans and review them. I don't know, if and when I'm gone, if anybody wants to continue doing that, but as long as I'm here, I'm happy to do that.
Right, but I think to the fairness of the council and to the planner and to the other boards, we can't pass legislation on one person. We have to pass things that are very flexible, that last a decade, that can be upgraded, with an understanding that boards, all boards, not just the EAC, all boards, people come, people go for myriad of reasons. And the BOT changes too, it's all moving parts. So laws have to be something with the intention of a decade. And they have to be manageable for the staff, and they have to be manageable for future members of these boards, so that when they come in, they understand what their roles are and what they need to do. So we have to just keep that in mind. Everything you said was fine. I'm not saying there's anything not okay, but when we get to the point of how do we implement things, what's reasonable, you know, a reasonable test, then you have to think about, can any board member do that? Can it last a few more years beyond this year? Not react to a specific situation, but an overall situation. But I do think that with lists and with the county updating lists and all of that stuff, that this is very doable. It's not even just in our municipality. This has become practice.
I thought our original kind of design of the ordinance was that units of 3 or more could only use plants that were from the county's native plants list website. So when they were designing their landscape plan, they basically just went to that list and be like, okay, here's the shrubs we can use, here's the trees we can use, and that was that. And then that way there wasn't a lot of additional oversight required, and the landscape artist, you know, the landscape designers were like, well, here's a list of plants we can build with this, and then that was that.
Yeah, I think we were using the county website, which I'm glad to hear. I don't know if you've heard something, Rika, about them updating their list, but their list is really not that great. I think that we've been using other references. For example, on the EAC webpage, we have the list that the town of Mount Pleasant drew up. That's a lot more options and has a lot more breakdown in terms of, you know, deer resistance and other things that a landscape architect would have to consider, like salt, road salt, and things like this. These are all things that kind of come into play.
So, but my point is that in giving direction to staff, you have to think in terms of how does one implement things, right? So if there is a county list, whether it's good or bad, it's better than nothing. Or if you say on our website, it should be like certain plans has to be updated with best to date information once in 2 years, and that's the list, then you could say things like that. And then it means that every 2 years, there's a responsibility, or every 3 years or whatever, to take the best information of that day, look at the county, look at the state, look at whatever you want to look at, put it on. If you say it's on the village website under EC, then that's where it sits, then people know.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't, but so that's a little, you know what I'm saying? There's got to be a little bit of parameters on how one implements things, because laws without teeth and laws without the ability, from the residents' point of view of ease, is really not fair, and it doesn't last very long. So we want to make it something that all parties concerned have access to, ease of use, and that the lawyer who writes this can say, I need to say to people, if you need this, you go here. If I can't say that, you know, it becomes more difficult. That's all I'm saying. And I do think we have everything in place. It's just a matter of pulling it together.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, we could gather some links to put onto the EAC webpage and then just refer developers to that webpage and say, you know, go to the EAC webpage. We have a plant list there. We have plant lists that, you know, are native. We have plant lists that are native and will resist soil, salt, you know, especially in the village. We have road salt problems. You know, I could definitely send Jamie Hoffman or Kane a bunch of links that they can put onto the EAC webpage that we can then use as the storehouse point for developers to refer to. That I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. I mean, I'm looking right now. Westchester Community College has the Native Plant Center, which has a list of native plants.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, a nice wallpaper picture.
Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to hijack the conversation. I just was curious to see where that
No,
was
but
at.
I think you brought up an important point. You brought us back on. That is what we discussed, actually.
It's actually not overly complex. Our code already provides what must be in a site plan application or a subdivision application. It is not a big lift to include that there needs to be, you know, plantings of some sort. And what you could do, for example, what the town does on its wetlands is they refer to the DEC manual for certain wetland issues. manual, which frankly has not been updated in a while, but the way it's worded is that when it gets updated, this gets updated. So you can refer it, but it's essentially we're just asking the developer / applicant / owner to provide an additional document in their packet that would go when site plan review is to be undertaken. And that would be this. And then, if they ask a question, where is it? You could say, well, if you look at the EAC webpage, we have all these different things. That's probably not, an overly, complex thing to do, and can probably just be put in again as one of the items that can be requested as part of the site plan review.
Do we have any other agenda items beyond this, or do we still have comments on this? So that's the second law that we would like done. Is there?
No, I mean, we have 3 agenda items. They sound sort of similar. I'm not sure they're different. The first agenda item was discussion of the town village environmental ordinance. The second agenda item is pending projects, collaborate with the town on overlap initiatives, issues, and scope. And then the third agenda item is establish channels for sharing services, expertise, and information to optimize project management and operations.
So for pending projects, I have only one question. Did I lose my intern?
Yeah, I think so.
That's what I thought.
I believe so,
Okay.
yeah.
I just need a very
All part-time staff has been furloughed. And I believe the intern was part-time staff.
Since when? Since when was that furlough?
Since the beginning, I think at the point of the village hall being shut down, part-time staff was furloughed. So I assume that person will be back, but I actually don't know.
Yeah, but I don't think that I'd like that discussed again with the village manager. First of all, I didn't realize that the intern for this was part-time staff. I didn't realize that was the category. Although now that you say that, I guess what would they be? I don't know. It's not generally what I think, but a lot of the work can be done remotely, and there are people like yourself working remotely. I mean, you're working, you're not furloughed, correct?
No.
Okay, so there are people who are working because they can do their job remotely, and this seems to be one of those. They're not. Do they need to be? Does the person need to be around anybody? Did we find somebody already, or I'm sort of missing something here?
No, as far as I know, when we were putting the ad out, that's when everything kind of just went crazy. So I didn't think it was really prioritized by anyone at that point, because it was just, I think everyone was very concerned with what are we going to do in the coming weeks. I kind of expected.
You know what? I don't even want to I don't want to maybe overstate what has happened.
Yeah, how could you furlough a non-existing?
I know that, if there was no person hired, then that person just never got hired.
Yeah.
So I know that there was an intern in the planning department, not in the planning department, but in the building department. And I just sort of connected the two, but maybe they're unrelated.
No, the last that was discussed, there was someone that was in mind, and I think Jamie had in mind to bring it to their attention, but then everything just kind of collapsed and
so what do you
was
want
put
to
on
do
the
with
back
this?
burner.
Right. So what do you want to do with this? Because from my perspective, there are lots of people, there are lots and lots of college kids graduating whose jobs have been rescinded. There are lots of people out there. A year ago at this time, it was very difficult to find anybody to do anything. Now there are plenty of people who are looking for work, and especially part-time, just a little something, some for money, some for just, busy work. This is a job that can be done, I think, predominantly remotely and via Zoom with somebody. So unless I think there's a physical part to it, right?
There is a physical part to it.
Right.
Someone would have to go to the sites that we're flagging as potential open space and do observations, see what's there, what's going on during the summer.
Right, but going out in public as a single person not in a group is something we should discuss, because I That's not a quarantine situation. I don't know how that falls in place, because there are people that are working. It's not like they're not. And this is not a person that would be with other people.
They would not, however, be considered an essential village employee. So they would probably have to do their work from home. They could not do their work on sites.
Right. But they could work remotely, you're saying, Stuart.
There's assuming that someone was brought on, there'd be no reason. In fact, what the governor would like is that everyone who could work at home works at home. So effectively, the answer is yes.
So back to Kate. Kate, how much of this could 50% be done remotely at home? That intern? 20%, 30%, any percent?
I mean, the intern primarily was to do field observations and then, digitize, make tables and organize the data once they've collected it. So some of it can be done at home, absolutely.
But they first
So maybe,
have to collect the data.
What?
But they first have to collect the data.
Yeah, they first have to collect the data in order to do the rest
So
of it.
that part is the problem. So they can't get to part 2 because they can't do part 1.
Right.
Okay.
So they can
All right.
do some of it at home, but it would have to be something either that they can access easily through a database, or something that's provided for them, but I don't have part 1 done. So primarily I wanted to see what these sites look like at particular times, so that if there were any environmental situations that could be flagged, to make a bigger argument to say, yes, we need this as open space and we want to protect this area and have it defined as part of the comprehensive plan as well, staying in line with that. Like, I would need actual real-time or as close to real-time observations of the site, and not rely on something from like 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Right, because the alternative is to go to Fernando, the assessor, and sort of get what they have on the books, not the physical things, but on the books, which could be outdated, as you just stated, and get all the right codes lined up, and which is what the town did, and get all the Excel sheets done. And then, do the codes that say, we do want to count cemeteries in, we don't, but you could help the intern with that. That part they could do, but you want them to physically go because you want them to actually look and say, oh, it says
This matches
X,
this,
but it's actually Y.
right?
That
Right.
part
And we
is
still would need to,
problematic.
we would still need whatever Fernando can give as far as whatever records we have, but we would need to just make sure that they're up to date. And that's really what the field observations would be for, is to make sure everything's accurate before we actually bring this and say, hey, this is what the plan is, and make sure everything's up to date.
All right, so Jaime, can you help think through this, maybe with Kate or something? We might have to do B first and then do A, but I don't, and we can just talk to the village manager. Yeah, budgets are all gonna have to be cut. This may be one of them. So regardless of this conversation, it seems a shame, especially since this will also create a little bit of employment. Many of our counselors, for example, that normally work in a camp may not be employed. I don't know what the number is. So they're definitely high school kids and college kids that may be interested in getting this on both their resume and also having a few bucks in their pocket. It's a shame to miss that opportunity, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd like to maybe have a follow-up conversation with Kate tomorrow or whenever you're available later this week. I think that maybe we need to hone in on the work, and then to whether there's funding to do it, because I don't know that if the funding isn't available to pay for an intern, that there shouldn't still be some effort made to getting that work done.
Yeah,
just trying to figure out how to do that.
I'm adaptable with that. If we can't get the intern, we can't get the intern. It's
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world as far as getting the project done. It would be helpful. But I completely understand where we are in terms of budgetary issues and just, public health issues and keeping people safe.
I mean,
I get it.
At the same time, I mean, I think the work needs to get done. So if that means I need to go out and do that work, then, we just need to figure out what that is and move forward. So
Okay.
it's a tough time.
Great, and I think,
for the
I think
village,
that will
so.
be very helpful to everybody.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys need to brain trust.
Will do.
Kate, are you working now virtually?
No.
Or you?
I don't have a job.
No, okay,
I don't have a job.
you don't.
I was
okay.
supposed to look for a job, but then everybody lost their jobs.
Right.
And now
Okay.
I'm looking at the possibility of more people in academia losing their jobs. They just don't know it yet.
Right.
And then that's going to be that'll be fun.
The next thing.
Yeah, a lot of universities, their admissions are going down, and a lot of students are starting to withdraw for the fall semester. So there will be a number of adjunct positions that are slashed. So that's
Right.
it's tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
No,
my
it's really
husband's
tough.
working. My husband's working. He hasn't stopped working, so that's at least good.
Yeah. No, that's really tough. So, and I'm sorry about that. I mean, my daughter's a senior in college, and I had this conversation with her. It's bad for the kids, obviously, but you know, the whole model. But I was just wondering, because one of the things I wanted to share with Jaime is that the truth is that all of our volunteers, you know, and not all, but many of our volunteers on the boards, all the boards, they work. And so a lot of projects that are really great don't really get done because we're all, you know, we're volunteers for a few hours a month. We didn't sign up to do a 30-hour project in addition to that. So we think that these kind of interns are helpful for all concerned. We're living in a little bit of a different time that has changed some things, but there's also opportunities, small ones, very small, tiny little opportunities, but we should grab what we can. Okay, well, thanks. And I'm sorry about
Yeah,
that.
I mean, yeah.
All aboard might open again in June, and if they open again, my toddler could at least go in. My 6-year-old's another story, but that's, you know,
Yeah,
I'm adaptable. We'll make it through.
yeah, you will. Okay, so it looks like we went through the agenda and we even.
Well, the last item was the established channels for sharing services, expertise, and information to optimize project management and operations. I'm not sure what that means.
Can you
I'm not
read that
sure
again?
either,
Can
but
you
I
read
think
that
that
again?
second bullet was about, we were supposed to meet with the town EAC and that never happened. I think that's what the second bullet was about.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the third item is establish channels for sharing services, expertise, and information to optimize project management and operations.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Is that about,
It sounds like we just need to make a Google Drive.
No.
Rika, I think that's what that was. Erica, remember we were talking about keeping communication lines open with the planning
Yes.
board and
Yes, the planning
zoning
and
board.
historical.
Tom's right. It was, we wanted to try and get to know the other land use boards.
Mhm.
I don't know if the people have changed on those boards. We've kind of sort of met people from the planning board.
There's a lot of new people.
Okay.
No,
That's good.
not since they've been on, Jaime. They're just as new. This EAC is just as new as the other ones.
Okay.
Okay, so we don't know, we would like to sort of get to know the zoning board of appeals, you know, the other land use boards, because this all came about because of the Birch Book project, right? We were sort of like kind of shocked when it fell in our laps and it had gotten as far as it had. And so we realized that there was kind of a systemic issue. You know, we had hoped that that project would have come before us much earlier in the game, so we could have provided some feedback on, you know, what we thought would have been the right way to proceed with the developer on that project. So you know,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to ask this question. Who determines what gets sent to the EAC? Who makes that decision?
The chair, as far as I know, it's the chair.
Well,
So the planning board?
Certain projects are required to come in front of us, and Stuart could speak to that.
Jaime, anything that is west of Route 9,
Mm-hmm.
which is within the LWRP zone, is required to go to the EAC.
Mm-hmm.
Birchbrook, which is not west of Route 9, went to the EAC essentially at my request to the planning board. Let's call it one of my last acts as land use council. But that's what happened there. But it's the one specific referral for the EAC that's mandated by our code deals with projects that are west of Route 9.
So is that, I guess my question is that
Sorry,
determination made by the, is that determination made by the planning board chair once an application gets to the planning board? Or is it made by the building inspector once an application, for development is denied?
Well, if it's west of 9, what has been the practice to this point, and now and preceding me, was that there would be an initial meeting by the planning board on a particular matter before they take any votes, and at the planning board would then, in essence, formally recommend or formally refer the matter to the EAC for their report and recommendation or their input. That's how the process worked. Previously, because the prior iteration of the EAC consisted of 9 members, and we had a very difficult time getting a quorum. As a result, there were what effectively would happen, and it's written into the code, is that if the EAC essentially doesn't act within 30 days, it goes back to the referring board. And what would often happen is the matter would just go right back to the planning board without input from the EAC, because the EAC never had a quorum to do anything. But the practice, the way it should be, is that it gets sent over. Now, there's nothing that prohibits it to go at an earlier stage in the process. It does, but the way the code is now, it's projects that are west of Route 9. And when it comes in, we all know what's west of Route 9 because we know what the addresses are. So once that's in, we know that that's a matter that has to go to the EAC. It has been the practice to date that it does not go to the EAC until there has been an initial planning board meeting to look at a particular project. And part of that is because it's hoped that that first planning board meeting, the planning board will have received certain comments from their engineering consultant, presumably from the planner, and that information, all of that information, can be gathered and sent over to the EAC so they can make their determination. And the effort was that the EAC would have a meeting before the next planning board meeting, so that if they could make their recommendation, the planning board would have it at their meeting. So if the planning board was prepared to vote, they would at least have that information before them. That's the way it, what was supposed to work. I can tell you that in my time as land use council, and before that observing the board, it was never an independent referral by the planning board to the EAC. The planning board chair never said, oh, by the way, this is a matter that I think should go to the EAC. It went to the EAC if it was a project that fit in within the categories of being west of Route 9. And that was done as a matter of course. Land use council would simply say to the chair, well, this is a west of Route 9 matter, it needs to go over. Other projects did not go as a matter of course, just they didn't. Birchbrook was frankly the exception to the rule, because as I said, it's not west of Route 9, but it was, it did go over to the EAC, frankly, at council's request.
Okay, all right. I mean, the reason I ask is because I think that Erica's point is well made, that if you could get these applications earlier in the process, It would make it a lot easier. I think that for developers, the quicker that that comments can be provided, the quicker they can get through the process of getting an approval. I think that, most developers, and every month that you lose is time that you're not building the project, you're not making money off the project. So the urgency to get it to everybody who needs to take a look at it as quickly as possible would make sense. I think that, I would want to talk to, obviously the village manager, but also with Stuart a little more offline about whether or not some of these projects, which have to go to the EAC anyways, that comes out as part of the inspector's initial denial letter, at least as a statement in the denial letter, even if it still goes to the planning board and then immediately goes to that point, so that you can start organizing that meeting as soon as it gets put on the planning board to take place essentially, the next week or 2 weeks after, so that you have that opportunity to do that. Because if the application to go on the planning board gets it put on the EAC automatically, it still may allow for the opportunity for the planning board to weigh in, to have a review by Keller Sessions and get everything else done, but it doesn't require, the EAC to kind of get put on notice really late and then say, hey, you have a week to come together to figure out when your meeting's going to be. Rather, it happens automatically as a matter of course. And if the wetlands ordinance goes through, then maybe that would be another sort of triggering mechanism that says that if there's a wetland on this property or within 100 feet of this property in the buffer area or whatever it is, that it automatically gets, referred out to the EAC, and it just maybe takes place in a statutory process to speed everything along. Because I think the worst thing that could happen is that, people lose time. And I think that projects, I don't know the full specifics of Birchbrook, but I imagine that the developer would be a lot more amenable if they hadn't already sunk, $20,000 or $30,000 into engineering the site to changes that would have been amenable to the EAC. So that's just my guess, but.
Sorry. If you look at the charter of the EAC, if you will, in the village code, we actually have some broad responsibilities in that, we provide environmental advice, not just on properties that are west of Route 9. I think the role of the EAC has been shrunk to just that pigeonhole because they were having such a hard time getting and maintaining an active council with members who were showing up and that kind of thing. But I think we all are much more interested in providing environmental review and advisory on projects beyond west of Route 9 within the village itself. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage by getting to know the other planning boards, is so that they see us as an assistant to them and see us as a help to basically creating better projects for the village rather than just one more hurdle they have to deal with. So I think that was our point.
I wonder how, I imagine the challenge of getting you all together to talk to each other.
Well, now, yes.
Nowadays it's a little hard. So it'd be hard to try to figure out the way to crack that nut, but.
Yeah, a couple months ago, I would suggest
there might be some.
We had, the idea had came up of having a liaison. I don't know if that's something we still can do at this point, if it's even realistic with everything going on, and at least for now. But I know that's something that the town was doing, and they kind of gave us the idea of that maybe in the future we should consider having liaisons to the boards.
I think a liaison might make sense. I do also think that, it's my job as staff to this board and staff to that board to make sure that, communication is happening, and make sure that if there's information that you feel needs to be conferred to the other board, that it gets there. In my experience working in Mount Vernon, a lot of times that would go by way of a letter. So, when a project comes up, the EAC in their meeting would meet and say, this is our letter in response, and we go there, or the planning board, would send their letter to the zoning board, so that there's official correspondence. It is kind of important for the record for any planning board decision that correspondence is official. And so, if you have some advice, it may be better to make sure that you're hitting all those points by writing it in a letter and submitting it to the planning board than just showing up and sort of speaking off the cuff and hoping that you remember everything in there. It's a little more secure to send it as a letter. You can still show up to the meeting if you think that there's like worthwhile commentary that you want to provide. But getting that letter in as a part of your response, even if it's unsolicited, is something that, that I would have to make sure gets read into the record, and I can, try to convey your opinion to the board at a minimum if somebody is unable to come in as a liaison on a temporary or permanent basis.
Well, we write excellent
I
letters.
think the key, Jaime, is what you hit on earlier, and just having certain project characteristics trigger a project to come in front of the board or the EAC early on, because we're listed as being part of the seeker process. That by the time that process is initiated, the developer's been in front of the planning board for months, and they've made a determination as to what the process is going to be, and that's what was happening with Birchbrook. They came, we would have seen them eventually, but it would have been 6 months to a year after they had already started with the village, and we would have been seeing them for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a development standpoint, the key with everything is that, if you're a developer, you're investing a lot of money in engineering, you're investing a lot of money in the front end on pre-development costs to get a project to move forward. And so you really want to get all that information early in the process. Now, on the municipal side, you'll see sometimes, infighting where it's like turf wars between different boards, and that's sort of irrelevant to the project, right? If a property is vacant and it's undeveloped and it's not paying the proper property taxes that it should be paying, if it was developed, it's not doing any of the stuff that it's supposed to do, and all those benefits you get. So there's a benefit to the municipality, and there's a benefit to the developer, benefit to everybody to have all those discussions as early as you can to get them out of the way and end up with the best possible project. And so if you initiate the process with the turf war, then that's what happens. You end up 6 months down the road providing comments, which would have been really helpful, 30 days into the project, because you would have had the ability to change it. Then at that point, financial decisions start coming into play as to people saying, well, if we do all these changes, it's going to cost this, cost that. Whereas those changes, those changes would have been easier to do, right? To incorporate. So I think it's a good idea to try to make it statutory, to make it sort of, administratively starting out as intended, getting all the comments early. It helps everybody. I mean, it's really hard to, other than, again, turf wars, there's no real good reason to hold people off till the end.
I do like the idea of creating a list of triggers that, if a project comes in and like off the cuff of my head, I'm thinking project is being developed next to an empty or vacant lot that's been reclaimed by nature, or next to an area that is forested and has a lot of natural native growth to it, things like that, where it would be nice to have our input to make sure that when construction is going on in the lot, it doesn't spill out into, the natural area around it. Or like we had the instance, I don't know if it was with Birchbrook, where they wound up cutting down 3 times as many trees as they were allowed.
That was them.
Yeah, it was supposed to. I mean, just things like that, where like a large amount of trees are going to be removed, like all of that. Those could be a list of triggers that the zoning board and the land use board, planning board, they know, okay, these things are going to be in part of this project, so that means that the EAC needs to take a look at step 1 or step 2. Anyway.
Okay. I'll again, I have to confer with Stuart. I got to look at the legislation to see, how the ordinance is written, to see where we can apply something administratively to try to do that. And again, there's a bunch of different parties that I have to talk to see what their feelings are on all of this stuff. But I do think it makes sense to, like I said, to get it out as early as possible. And if we have a clearly defined set of what should be getting referred out. I think it makes it easier for the planning board. It makes it easier for me, and I think it makes it easier for you to set expectations. To say like, you don't want to be coming in later like, hey, I thought we were supposed to hear this, but you know what I mean? Like that's frustrating
Becomes
too. I think.
uncomfortable throwing a wrench into a project that's been in front of the village for several months.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
and I think it's also kind of stressful from a board engagement process. Imagine if you have 9 members of a board and they feel like they don't care about my opinion anyways.
Mm.
I'm not going to show up to this meeting, and then you have no quorum, and then it's sort of like nullifies the board. So, you know, that's not good either.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, like you said, we're all busy people. We're all, you know, putting our time and energy into this, and we don't want to feel like it's in vain. So
Let me just say this. I apologize. They work as hard as you do on the other boards.
Oh, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I know that what you do is very important. Please, they work like dogs on their projects. I mean, and they do it a lot. And I know they get grief on occasion, and I know the ZBA does, but I don't want it to come across like, you know, they're not doing, they really work very hard.
They do, yeah.
And they do it and it's a tough job, and they have a lot of difficult decisions to make. And I know that sometimes, you know, feathers get ruffled, but it's not because everyone has their different ways, but I think it's important to understand they work very hard. They're trying to get projects approved as best they can, and input from others is important. But I just wanted to make that point because I think it's important from their perspective as well.
Oh, absolutely. And we know that there is a huge historical backstory to this as well. And we're I think, you know, I'm very respectful of that because you know, and we certainly don't want to discourage business from coming to the village because it's so difficult and there's so many loops that they have to jump through either. I mean, I don't think anyone here feels that way. So, you know, it's just that's why we want to foster a good relationship between the other boards and have them know us and we know them, and that the communication flows easily so that their jobs are not any harder than they are now.
Yeah. I mean, I've visited every board. I think everybody's, you know, dedicated. Everybody wants to see good stuff. There's a lot of new people on, you know, the ZBA and planning board, but I think everybody's, you know, they're all trying to do the best they can. So it's a good point that Stuart makes. And so, you know, again, trying to figure out those administrative processes that can help move the process along as quickly as possible. So, great.
So I will, I wrote down some notes here. I will follow up with some links that we'll be putting on the EAC page that developers can refer to. That's my follow-up for this meeting. And will someone pass around some meeting notes so we could know what other follow-ups need to get done?
We'll get meeting minutes. I know Jamie's gonna do the meeting minutes.
Okay.
And also, because we're doing this remotely, we're required to produce a transcript. So within the next couple of days, we will have a transcript, which actually gets posted onto the website itself. But we'll send it to you before it's actually reviewed so you can at least sort of see it. But Zoom actually has one of its functions to provide transcripts. So you will get a transcript so everyone can sort of see what was said and parse out from there. But there are minutes taken as well, and Jamie will do that, but you'll all get a copy of the transcript.
Okay.
Great.
That's a nice function of Zoom.
And Jaime, I will be in touch with you this week
Great.
regarding the open space stuff.
Awesome.
Okay.
I think that covers it.
All right.
Do you guys need to make a motion?
Well, there is the adoption of minutes from the February 4th meeting, but I don't know if everybody has a copy. The minutes, I wasn't here and I don't have them, a copy of the minutes.
We can hold it. It's okay.
Okay, all right then. And that's it.
Someone want to make a motion to adjourn and someone second?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you, folks.
Have,
Pleasure meeting
Have a-
everyone.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.